Well, we are. This is, I guess, actually face to face, just not quite physically face to face. But it's certainly better than just sending emails and things of that nature, which are also important. But getting to see everybody is a good thing. So welcome today. I want to thank our friends from CMC for being with us today, and on I think almost every webinar that we've done, and every one that we're scheduled to do. These guys are amazing. I'm going to introduce them to you in a couple minutes here as well. Couple instructions regarding Zoom. Most of you have done a lot, have been doing this for a while, so you kind of know the route. But I'll give you a couple quick little pointers. Make sure that you're muted unless you're the one who's going to be speaking. We'll have a chance for question and answer at the end. So the best way to do that is to type in any questions you've got in the chat box at the bottom. If you let your mouse go down to the bottom and click on chat, you can type in a question. But they're going to cover a lot of information today about PPP forgiveness and how to make sure that it is actually forgiven. And we're going to be hearing from Mr. Mark Blacksten and Mr. Dave Hogue of M&T Bank in just a couple of minutes. The other thing is, most of you are doing pretty well, but just make sure you can change your name if you want to on your screen as we see it. So if you just have your first name showing, unless you're like Brittany or Beyonce or somebody and everybody knows who you are, you might want to write your full name, and you might even be, like at that point want to write what company that you're from. And you can do that by either right clicking on your name with your mouse or going to the top of your screen and clicking on the three little dots, and you'll get a drop down where you can rename yourself. So we have some upcoming events that I wanted to share with you. Some webinars that are ours and some that are other ones that we'd like to promote. First one that I want to talk about is SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management, has a webinar on diversity and inclusion that's going to be coming up, and you can see that on your screen hopefully right now. I believe that's on Monday the 20th. There's another webinar, I think, on the same day. I didn't write the date down, but I think it is Monday the 20th through the Maryland Chamber Foundation, the Business Imperative for Equity and Inclusion. The Chamber then also wants to let you know that the grant, the actual Carroll Rebound Grant being administered through our local county has been extended to July 31st. So you can go to their website, carrollbiz.org, to fill that out. Next, July 23rd, we're going to try a fun one. So you guys should definitely try to go ahead and check that out. You have to go to our website to register for this one, which is carrollcountychamber.org. But we're going to do a little trivia night from 4 to 5:30. Just looking to try to have some fun and get people laughing a little bit. And I think it's going to be good. It's something new we haven't done before, but that usually means it's going to be fun. And if we bomb, we bomb, and we can all laugh at it at the same time. But I think it's going to be great. August 18th, we have our Commissioner's Breakfast. Normally, this would be at one of the actual library branches, but we're going to still be doing this via Zoom right now. And that's going to be from 8 to 9 in the morning, August 18th. And that's going to be with Commissioner Weaver. A next update, August 27th, would be what I would probably call the Chamber's marquee event, our Carroll Biz Challenge. It's like a Shark Tank show. I can guarantee this year we normally fill the Arts Theater on Main Street in Westminster. But this year I can guarantee we're not going to fill that, because I don't think we're going to be able to fill that. So we're probably going to have the people who are going to pitch there, the panel that's going to judge them there, the crew from CMC to film it, and you'll be able to watch this streamed live with our friends from CMC, which they're streaming today also on HD 1086, their website, their Facebook page, their YouTube. It's everywhere. They're going to have this up on CNN soon. I mean, they've got control over everything practically. No, I'm only kidding. Then Leadership Carroll is an amazing program that we administer through the Chamber in partnership with Carroll Community College. It is full up for this next year. It is going to happen. I've been thinking about that. This is kind of going to be some of the new actual normal that we're going through. I mean, I'm sure at some point we're all going to be able to get back together, but I think even then there may be some people that are a little bit leery of getting back with large groups. I think we've turned a bit of a way on like a different road here now as far as how business is going to be conducted, and relationship building to some extent is going to happen more through calls like this as well. And it's a lot easier to maintain a relationship like this than it is to create one. but people that you know, it's always good to see them face to face. So Leadership Carroll is going to be interesting for this year. We've got backup plans to the backup plans, so it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're interested, you can apply for the next year. We'll be taking your applications. That would start in September of 2021. And the last announcement that I have is that the Chamber has our golf outing October 30th. So please do register. It was originally set for July 10th, but we backed it off. But if you have a hankering to golf, you can go to the Carroll Technology Council website, because they have a golf outing coming up Friday, July 31st at the Links of Shaladon. And we're going to be there for that. And they always do a great, great job. So that being said, again, I want to thank our friends from the Community Media Center. And that would be Mr. Richard Turner, who's Executive Director. And I want to turn things over to him for a minute and let him tell you a little bit about how amazing they are and what they do. Richard, they're all yours.
Great. Thanks so much. And good morning, everyone. Great to see folks. Thanks to the Chamber and that extended network that you've got, Mike. It's just, you do a fantastic job there. Really appreciate all the community connections that happen as a result. And I'd encourage anyone who isn't a member, who's taking advantage of these webinars, to join the Chamber and be able to take advantage of the extended services you offer. We're really excited about the PPP program, but it was driving us crazy. We, as an organization, wanted to be able to take advantage of it because we were concerned and we were going to see a drop in our revenues. And I know my business administrator is on the webinar. I think she was tracking every possible publication that was coming out and notice that was coming out as they changed the rules. So I think it's really great that we have this opportunity to hear more about what's happening with the PPP program. And a little bit of transparency here. M&T is our bank, and so we had a great relationship with them. We got great information from them, and it really helped us in terms of getting our submittal in and getting our approval for the PPP. So it's great to have them on the line and see their engagement in community. Thanks also to the CMC team. They're my superheroes. They're in here all hours of the day trying to make sure that we get the word out to our community about what's going on in the towns. And Mike encourages us to shop local, and I encourage you to watch local. So you can go to our website, which is carrollmediacenter.org, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, post, share, all those crazy click things that you can do. Help us get the word out about what's going on, the good news in our community. So thanks very much, Mike.
Thank you, Richard. And you guys are amazing for us to work with. We just love it. So thanks. All right, that being said, we're going to go over to the main event here. And again, I would say if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. And at the end, we'll get to them. So I'm going to turn things over to two superstars from M&T Bank, who also happen to be one of the main banks we use at the Chamber, because when I started, I'll be here for 10 years in the fall, we were desperately looking for a line of credit. We were struggling. I didn't quite know how much when they hired me, but we went to a few banks and we got turned down, and these guys welcomed us with open arms, and they've been there for us ever since. And they're great to work with. So I want to turn things over to Mr. Mark Blacksten and Mr. Dave Hogue from M&T Bank. Gentlemen, they're all yours.
Thank you. And I'm going to hit the screens here, Mike. So just give me a thumbs up if you're starting to see it. All right. And I think Dave's going to kick us off, so I'll turn it over to Dave.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to Mike and the Chamber and Richard and the Community Media Center for the opportunity to discuss loan forgiveness as it relates to the Paycheck Protection Program. So ever since the CARES Act was instituted in March, many banks within our community have been working tirelessly to help their local businesses and clients affected by the pandemic to access much needed funding made available through the program, and M&T was no exception. So consistent with its designation as the top SBA lender in the Baltimore region, M&T of note made more Paycheck Protection Program or PPP loans of at least $150,000 to businesses in Greater Baltimore than any other institution. And this commitment throughout the bank's footprint led to M&T standing as a top 10 PPP lender nationally. With that said, a topic that was close to everyone's mind since the beginning of the program was forgiveness. Similar to the PPP application process, the forgiveness process has been constantly evolving in an effort to accommodate as many businesses as possible. Today, we will cover the PPP Flexibility Act that was signed into law on June 5th and related SBA guidance that was revised just a few days ago in that ever-changing evolution of this process. And just to note that it's anticipated that there could be additional changes in the coming days and weeks. So moving on to slide 2, where do I apply for loan forgiveness? And that's a pretty simple answer. The lender that provided the PPP funding will be the same that you would apply for forgiveness through. All banks adhere to the same guidelines. However, each bank may have a different procedure to initiate the forgiveness process. So check with your respective bank ahead of time so that you can educate yourself and ultimately be prepared for that process. A few things to keep in mind: if you use a payroll provider, check with them for reporting to demonstrate the necessary payroll expenses to be reported. And you may also apply as soon as your covered period concludes or when the lender application process opens if you have all the required information and documentation. Lenders have up to 60 days to conduct their review, and the SBA could conduct their own review following submission from the lender, which can take up to 90 days before the SBA approved loan forgiveness payment is remitted to the respective lender and posted to your loan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mark Blacksten now to discuss some important aspects of the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. Mark?
Hey, thanks, Dave. So on June 5th, 2020, Congress passed and the President signed into law the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act. The intent of this law is to give small businesses, such as everyone on this call, more flexibility and time to make qualifying expenditures for loan forgiveness. So on slide 3, here are a couple highlights of that Flexibility Act. So starting on the left column, first, PPP borrowers have a longer period of time to spend their dollars. The Act triples the allotted time for loan recipients to spend the funds and still qualify for forgiveness. It lengthens the forgiveness period from 8 weeks, or 56 days, to 24 weeks, or 168 days, but not beyond December 31st, 2020. For those PPP borrowers that received a loan prior to June 5th, and that was the enactment of the law, you maintain the option to still use the original 8-week period. In addition, recent SBA guidance clarified that you may apply for forgiveness prior to the end of your covered period. These provisions were designed to make it easier for borrowers to reach full and almost full forgiveness. The next item is the Act extends the payment deferment period. Prior to the enactment of Flexibility Act, principal and interest on each PPP loan were to be deferred until the date that was 6 months after the loan's funding date. And that would have been the date that you received your funds in your deposit account from the bank that you used. That time frame had been revised to the date from which is eligible forgivable amount is remitted to the SBA back to the lender. It is also important to note for borrowers who do not apply for forgiveness within 10 months after the end of the cover period or December 31st, the deferral period for payments will end at that time, and then your payments, interest, and fees will begin after that. Third, borrowers now have greater flexibility in spending their PPP loan dollars. Originally, back when it was put in place in April, the Paycheck Protection Program rules required borrowers to utilize at least 75% of the loan towards eligible payroll costs. The remaining 25% could be used for eligible non-payroll costs. The Flexibility Act that was enacted on June 5th relaxed that requirement pretty significantly. It's actually a really big change. Now the minimum percentages are 60% of the proceeds used for payroll, with a 40% maximum of eligible non-payroll. So it's a really, really good benefit and change to folks that receive the PPP loan. Another critical change is related to payroll tax payments. The Act allows PPP borrowers to delay their payroll taxes through the end of 2020. The provision then requires that those payroll taxes be paid back over a 2-year period, so you have a little bit more time to pay it back. Half of it would be due December 31st, 2021, and then the remainder would be due before December 31st, 2022. So again, gives quite a bit of flexibility with the payroll tax piece. Next, the Flexibility Act, and we're on the column 2 of the slide. Next, the Flexibility Act provides additional exemptions from loan forgiveness reduction based on the inability to rehire to the same full-time equivalent level or the ability to resume prior levels of business activity. This has been a pretty common question we've been seeing when we've been asked about payroll protection. What do I do if I can't return back to the normal full-time equivalent levels prior to COVID? So this act allows some really nice flexibility that was not originally written in the April law. It does require that you have attempted to rehire to the same level, and you had or haven't had an inability to return to the same level before June 20th due to health and safety ordinances. This is something that you'll not only have to make a good faith effort to rehire, but you have to document it as well. I'm going to cover a little bit more details about this a little bit later, but that's a pretty high level around that. And then lastly, the Act gives guidance on the payroll cost cap of $100,000 employees of annual pay per employee for an extended covered period. So if you're utilizing the 8-week covered period, and again, you have the option to use that 8-week period if you received your PPP funding before June 5th. That maximum cap is $15,385 per individual employee. Or if you're electing to use the 24-week period, or you received your funding after June 5th, the maximum of that employee is $46,154 per individual. And there are a few additional updates related to owner employees, which we'll also cover a little bit later. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Dave Hogue, who's going to talk about the application process and some of the forms that were recently released by the SBA. Dave?
Thanks, Mark. And moving to slide 4 in relation to the application, the SBA and Department of the Treasury jointly released new loan forgiveness applications as recently as mid-June, and there are 2 applications available for use. The full application is known as Form 3508 and then Form 3508EZ, which is a simplified version of the full form. But before submitting the full application, review and be sure to check eligibility for the use of the 3508EZ form. And there are 3 eligible scenarios to use that form. The first is the borrower will be self-employed and have no employees. The second is to not reduce the salaries or wages of employees by more than 25%. And third, did not reduce the number of hours of employees. So that's not the case, and otherwise you'd have to use the full application. You'll be required to retain documentation supporting your loan forgiveness application for a minimum of 6 years, and after that date, the loan is forgiven or paid in full per the SBA guidance, and permit authorized representatives of the SBA, including representatives of its office or inspector general, to access such files upon request. So keep an accurate record of all your detail for forgiveness. The information on Schedule A worksheet includes additional detail on employees such as names, partial Social Security number, so the last 4 digits, and received compensation from the borrower at an annualized rate over or under $100,000 of income. So moving on to slide 5, how does forgiveness actually work? Some or all of PPP loans may be eligible for loan forgiveness if the borrower uses the proceeds to maintain payroll and eligible business expense, subject to reductions in FTE employees or in employee salary wages during the covered period. Minimally, 60% of the loan proceeds need to be used for paid or incurred payroll costs on payroll expenses, including health and retirement benefits and payment of state and local taxes. And note, federal taxes should not be included. For partners of self-employed, health and retirement benefits cannot be included in payroll costs either. 40% of usage can be used for other eligible business expenses, such as business mortgage expense, business rent and lease expenses, and business utility payments. It's important to note that mortgage loans, rent and lease agreements, as well as utilities, must have been in effect on February 15th, 2020 or prior to be eligible. To distinguish a little more between incurred and paid payroll costs are considered paid on the day that paychecks are distributed or the borrower originates an ACH credit transaction. Also, payroll costs incurred during the borrower's last pay period of the covered period or the alternative payroll covered period, if paid on or before the next regular payroll date. Otherwise, payroll costs must be paid during the covered period or alternative payroll covered period to be eligible for forgiveness. Also, payroll costs are generally incurred on the day the employee's pay is earned or the day the employee worked. For employees who are not performing work but are all still on the borrower's payroll, payroll costs are incurred based on the schedule established by the borrower, which will be selected on the loan forgiveness application. Next, we'll discuss what independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and sole proprietors would need to know for the forgiveness process. So I'll turn it back over to Mark for that.
Thanks, Dave. Apologize for the delay, I had to unmute. So if you're a PPP loan recipient that is an independent contractor or a self-employed individual or a sole proprietor, what is it that you need to know? So let's start a little bit with some basic terminology. An owner-employee is defined as any individual having greater than or equal to 20% ownership in a business. And that affects probably a lot of majority of the recipients of PPP. A lot of the small businesses were the recipients of these funds. But there are some unique considerations that we wanted to highlight as part of the PPP program. First, following along on the left on slide 6, owner compensation for the 8-week period is capped at the lesser of 8 weeks over 52 weeks of the 2019 net profits, and that would be something on your Schedule C or related tax filing, or $15,385 per individual in total across all businesses. And an owner-employee compensation that may be following the 24-week period, it's 2.5 months worth over 12 months of the 2019 net profit, and that's up to $20,833 per individual in total across all businesses. And again, as Dave pointed out earlier, this would also exclude any qualified sick leave amount for which would be claimed as part of the Families First Coronavirus Act that was put in place. Business owners with employees can also use eligible payroll and eligible non-payroll expenses for the employees themselves, but not for the owners. And the only exception to that is a W-2 owner employee. So what documentation do owners need to provide? It's actually fairly simple. And in many cases, and I'll review this in a second, in many cases, a self-employed borrower can use the easy forgiveness application form. But for eligible payroll expenses, generally speaking, you'll need to provide the Form 1040 Schedule C or Schedule F, which demonstrates profitability so you can validate those calculations. Borrowers without employees will be automatically eligible for the 8-week over 52 week of 2019 net profit, or if you elect the 24-month period, it's the 12 or the 2.5 over the 12-month net profit. And again, normally you wouldn't need to provide canceled checks or statements for payroll for requirements, but we do encourage, again, this is specific to M&T. So if you did receive your PPP funds from another fine lender in the area, please make sure you understand what their documentation requirements may be. There may be some differences based on their interpretations. And then for eligible non-payroll expenses, health benefits or retirement plan contributions are not included. However, again, owner employees that have W-2 can include health and retirement benefits. And again, just to reiterate, and I know we're covering a ton of information, this PowerPoint is available on our website for you to review after this. But back to the applications. Self-employed individuals can use the easy forgiveness application form as long as they don't have any employees on payroll. So however, if you are a self-employed individual with employees, you can also use that application if you meet one of the two requirements. And I'm just highlighting because it's really important. If you can use that forgiveness easy form, it's going to make life a little bit easier. No pun intended based on what that form's titled. But those requirements are: you did not reduce salaries or wages by more than 25% and did not reduce the number of hours of the employees over the covered period, or you did not reduce the salaries and wages of the employees by 25% and experience reductions in business activity as a result of health directives related to COVID-19. Those are some of the kind of the catch-alls for eligibility to use the easy form. Now with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit more about information regarding some examples of loan forgiveness.
Okay. Looking at slide 8, so prior to applying for forgiveness and to streamline that process, you want to have the following information prepared, and depending on your lender, either in PDF form or hard copy, but to support eligible and non-payroll expenses outlined on the forgiveness application. More specifically, the documentation showing the average number of FTE employees or payroll per month employed by the borrower between February 15th, 2019 and June 30th, 2019, or the average number of FTE employees on payroll per month employed by the borrower between January 1st, 2020 and February 29th, 2020. Or in the case of a seasonal employer, the average number of FTE employees on payroll per month employed by the borrower between February 15th, 2019 and June 30, 2019, between January 1st, 2020 and February 29th, 2020, or any consecutive 12-week period between May 1st, 2019 and September 15th, 2019. The selected time period must be the same time period selected for purposes of completing a PPP on Schedule A, line 11. So further, some documents may include payroll tax filings that have or will be reported, state quarterly business and individual employee wage reporting, unemployment insurance tax filings reported or that will be reported. Payroll expenses include bank account statements or third-party payroll service provider reports, which document cash compensation paid to employees. Tax forms or equivalent third-party payroll service provider reports for payroll tax filings and state quarterly wage reporting and unemployment insurance tax filings. Furthermore, payment receipts, canceled checks, or account statements documenting employee health insurance and retirement plan contributions. FTE documentation, any employee job offers and refusals, firings for cause, voluntary resignations, and written requests by any employee for reductions in work schedule, and documentation showing average number of FTE employees. Non-payroll expense documentation must verify the existence of the obligations or services prior to February 15, 2020, and eligible payments from the covered period. The documentation supplied should also show through 1 month after the end of the covered period to verify interest amounts and eligible payments. Business mortgage interest expense payments can show amortization schedule or canceled checks or bank statements from February 2020 and the covered 8-week period. Business rent and lease payment examples, a copy of a current lease or receipts, or canceled checks or bank statements from February 2020 and the covered period. Business utility payment examples, copy of invoices from February 2020 and covered period, and receipts, canceled checks, or account statements. But check with obviously with your bank, specific bank, they may have other additional documentation or specific documentation they need for the forgiveness process. Moving on to slide 9. Understanding what happens to the portion of the PPP that isn't forgiven. So if all or part of your loan is not forgiven, the unpaid balance must be repaid per the original terms of the note unless renegotiated per SBA guidelines. And remember, there are no prepayment penalties with these notes. At the end of the 10-month deferment period, unless you have applied for forgiveness, you will receive notice of the monthly amount due to start on month 11. If approved for loan forgiveness in part or in whole, once the loan forgiveness payment is applied to your monthly payments will be recalculated as fixed P&I payments over the remaining term of the loan. And this may occur before, on, or after your first payment is due. If this occurs after, you will receive an updated notice regarding your monthly payment amounts in that regard. So again, check with your lender as there may be some additional guidance. And with that, I'll turn it back to Mark to talk about some additional resources moving forward.
Thanks, Dave. And before I do that, and thank you for that, I purposely skipped over slide 7 because I wanted to give us a chance to review a couple things. But first off, the documentation piece, if there's one thing that you can leave here today with, is making sure you take time to review all the documents that are required to submit as part of your forgiveness application. And the best way to do that is to make sure you review the applications that are available on the SBA.gov website. You may or may not need to actually fill out that full application depending on which banking institution you're working with. For example, M&T is planning to utilize an online portal for applications. When we release that, all the information can be filled out on the portal, not requiring that document to be filled out in advance. But other institutions may be handling it a little bit differently. So we do encourage everyone to make sure you understand what that application process, once it starts opening up at banks, you have an understanding of what that looks like. But in any event, those applications do contain a ton of information about all the documentation that you should be putting together to, obviously, the goal is to increase the chances of getting 100% forgiveness, and your banking partner is there to help you do that and navigate that. So that's one of the most important things. But before I wrap it up, I wanted to just remind deep dive into a couple things we talked about earlier. And it's important that you choose the cover period that will allow all eligible payroll and non-payroll expenses to be paid out prior to applying for your loan forgiveness. That means the cover period should align with your payroll and non-payroll expense disbursement, payment, and documentation. Keeping those in order is really important. So you cannot, and just as a reminder, you cannot pay for expenses prior to receiving your funds. So if you received your funds, say on April 27th, if there were expenses prior to that, they would generally not be included as part of a usage. So making sure you're aligning the date you receive the funds over that cover period with the expenses that you're using it for. Some important dates and considerations when preparing your application that we've talked about a couple times are that expenses should be over the 8-week or the 24-week period, but no later than December 31st, 2020. And it begins when the loan was dispersed, or unless you're selecting to use the alternative payroll covered period based on the first pay date following disbursement. Which is also, it's funny because this is government, it's also known as cover period, so it's a little bit confusing. But as a reminder, the alternative payroll cover period begins 8 weeks or 24 weeks from the first day of the first payroll cycle after you received your funds. So you do have that option to select that one of those periods. Following along the bottom corner of the slide, let's revisit real quickly the exemption based on employee availability. Again, this is a hot topic that a lot of folks have been asking about, and there's good reason for it. There was a lot of businesses that were closed due to health restrictions and government shutdown requirements. You had employees who maybe didn't feel comfortable coming back to work. There were a lot of reasons why the unemployment programs that were available for employees that were paying the $600 a week. There were a lot of competing things that were impacting small businesses such as yourselves as to why maybe employees were not willing to come back, or you're having trouble recruiting them back, or quite frankly, you weren't open yet. So there were a number of things. So the Flexibility Act did ease some of those restrictions for businesses based on some of those concerns. So if you apply for loan forgiveness by December 31st, 2020, you do have additional options to help cure any of those FTE reductions, which is part of that Paycheck Protection Program. So prior to the Act, prior to the Flexibility Act, when it was originally set up in April, a PPP borrower had until June 30th, 2020 to eliminate a reduction in employment, salary, and wages that would otherwise reduce the forgivable amount of the loan. The Flexibility Act extended this period, known as Safe Harbor period, to December 31st, 2020. The Act provides that PPP borrowers will not experience a reduction in their forgiveness amount due to a decline in the FTE employee count if the PPP borrower, and in good faith, that's a key word, and is able to document, one, an inability to rehire individuals who were employees of the borrower on February 15, 2020, and an inability to hire similarly qualified employees for unfilled positions on or before December 31st. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there's an inability to return to the same level of business activity as such the business was operating before February 15th, again, due to compliance with requirements issued by local government agencies, et cetera, and related to standards of sanitation, social distancing, or other worker safety requirements. But as highlighted previously, the FTE reduction exception, you have at least until December 31st, 2020 to restore those levels back to that. Retention requirements important. It's important to note that SBA requires you to retain records of the offer and the rejection. However, you don't really need to submit that to the bank, but also check with the bank that you're working with. They may require it. It is also important to highlight that you are obligated to notify the state unemployment office of the employee's rejection. So in that scenario, you offer the position back to the employee. In good faith, they rejected, you documented it, and then the law requires that you notify the state agency within 30 days. Again, documentation is key in this whole process. So I can't underscore that enough in what we're talking about today. If it's anything related to the use of your funds, employees, just keep every document you can. You're likely going to need it because in addition to the bank reviewing this for eligibility, which is usually the intake process, the SBA is obviously reviewing it and signing off on it as well as a secondary loan. So that's a pretty big deep dive into that. And I know we covered a lot of things. So kind of as we wrap up, just talk about a couple things that are available. So as you start preparing your loan forgiveness application, either with M&T or one of the other fine banking institutions in the area, and again, you have to apply where you originated your PPP loan. Please be aware there's a lot of resources available to assist you through the journey. It was great hearing Richard earlier in our webinar here talk about downloading as much information as you can to learn about the changes. I can't even tell you how many changes have been made since beginning of April. There are just mounds and mounds of they call them IFRs, interim financial releases, but they're interim final rulings, and they change so frequently, and banks have to adjust, and obviously PPP borrowers have to adjust, and we're all trying to catch up. But I think we have a nice plan. Forgiveness is just around the corner, so we hope that that process will go real smooth across obviously the nation and all the banks and the small businesses that are participating with it. But with that said, there are a lot of resources. The first of which is here at M&T, we have a resource that's publicly available to anybody. This presentation is available on that website, but you can go on there for any other FAQs or tools or resources regarding forgiveness. Obviously, check your own bank's websites and resources. They likely will have similar items that are available. One really great place is the treasury.gov site. If you have not looked at that yet, there is a page dedicated to Paycheck Protection Program and includes all the interim final rules. I apologize for my misspeak earlier, but it does show all the details related to the changes and updates that are happening with the PPP program, as well as the PPP Flexibility Act, which we reviewed here today. And then lastly, the SBA.gov site that's out there that also has a lot of the similar information. But talk with your local banker, business professional. Dave and I are available if you need to catch up with us at any time. We're happy to be a resource if we can. But the rules are changing fast and often. We could be talking about this right now, and about an hour from now, there could be another release. So that seems to be the way this process works. But we're all in this together, and our goal again is to help everyone as much as we can to reach full forgiveness. And before I turn it back over, just a couple thank yous. I want to thank you, Mike, and the staff. Camera back, and the chamber staff for working with us to deliver this webinar. And thanks to our good friends at the Media Center. Public access television is super important to our local community. So shout out to Richard and Aaron and the team over there for the technical support to make today's webinar happen, and for all the businesses and citizens of Carroll County that use that so well. Thanks to my friend and M&T colleague and Chamber of Commerce board member, Dave Hogue, for partnering with me today. And finally, thank you to the Carroll County Chamber members and the other small businesses that are on here today. We really know how hard you're all working during these unprecedented, crazy times. And we're all affected by this. But we are also all in this together and trying to be resources for one another as we work through many of these things, especially something like a government run PPP program, where there's a lot of details and nuances and information that we all kind of have to disseminate as well. So with that, and in the words of Mike McMullen, I also say shop local, eat local, and conduct your business local. It's super important to support your Carroll County neighbors. So with that, Mike, I'll flip it back to you.
Mark and Dave, thank you guys so much. And we definitely have some questions here. I also want to say, don't forget, everybody watching, this will be on CMC's website. It'll be on the Chamber website. There's a lot of information to go over here. This is quite possibly the first and only time I've almost been happy that we're a 501c6 and not eligible for this, because filling out these forms would drive me out of my mind. I'd have to find somebody else to do it. But thank you guys so much for going over this. So let me do a couple questions here. We have one from Nurse Laura saying, please clarify in case I missed it. How do I demonstrate payroll payment if I am owner and no employees? My monthly P&L or owner payout check? You guys understand that question?
Yeah, can you repeat that one more time?
Yep. It says, in case I missed it, how do I demonstrate payroll payment if I'm owner and have no employees? Can she use her monthly P&L report or an owner payout check?
Yes. Correct. Yep. On page 6 of the PowerPoint, I'm going to see if I can share it here again. And let me see. Bear with me a second. I hit unshare. Y'all seeing that?
Nope.
Oh, one sec. Apologies, technical issues.
Something's coming up. There we go.
Yep. Provide the Form 1040 Schedule C or Schedule F demonstrating profitability or borrowers without employees. And I think this was a situation, and I apologize, what was the name who asked the question?
Nurse Laura.
Nurse Laura, yeah, Nurse Laura, yes. So the 1040 Schedule C form, Schedule F demonstrating profitability form is likely what you would need. I'm going to also write down your information after this, and I'm happy to get in contact with you and share some additional resources with you.
Thank you, sir. Richard, you had a question. I think I'll just let you ask it yourself. You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm buried under too many windows trying to find more to share with everybody. You know, yeah, absolutely. The amount of information and changes that comes out can be overwhelming. I know, as I mentioned, my business administrator before, she mentioned she was having nightmares.
Oh my.
Trying to keep track of all this stuff. And so do we know when they'll be done making these changes and releasing IFR, or could they just keep on going? I mean, when do we know that we've got the rules and can submit the application for forgiveness and know what we're on?
That's an outstanding question, Richard. And there is no, I think, timeline. The rules are changing very fast. I think we're getting closer. There is some of the questions I get in when we do these. One of the things is, what other pending legislation is there? And there is some things still swirling out there that's not either been enacted by Congress or put forth in a bill form yet. One of them is the potential for blanket forgiveness consideration for PPP loans that are $150,000 and under. So there's a lot of talk in the media right now. And if you follow any of the legal journals, that is swirling out there, but nothing's set in stone. So that's one I know banks are keeping an eye on, and small businesses should as well, because the goal would be to make that process easier, especially with our smaller businesses that receive these funds. So that's one example. But hopefully, Richard, we do get a little bit more information that is more set in stone so that banks can start feeling comfortable opening up the forgiveness. One of the reasons banks haven't done it yet is the SBA has not provided institutions with information on how they transmit information once you send it to the bank to them for review. That process has not been outlined yet. So, and as Dave pointed out earlier, once you make the application, the time clock starts. So we would never want to put a customer in a situation where we're accepting something and then the time clock starts, but then we don't know how to send it to SBA yet in the proper protocol. So there are some of those things that are still swirling out there that the SBA and the Treasury need to kind of outline. So we do expect, hopefully soon, some of those details to be completed because folks are getting anxious. Everybody wants to start, getting their forgiveness application process started, and we want to help them with that. So, but excellent question. But following the Treasury.gov site is an excellent way to keep up to date on what's happening. They publish the most recent changes in IFRs pretty quickly after they occur.
Thanks a lot, Mark. Yeah, this is not the easiest thing. I mean, I guess it is once you get rolling, but it almost feels like you're filling out your taxes. And if this, if that, let me ask you this. I jotted down a couple of things, and if anybody else has any questions, please type them in. But since I don't see any, I'm going to ask a couple. What if you're trying to fill this thing out, you're doing the best thing that you can, and you kind of screw it up a little bit, and the SBA says that you're not eligible for loan forgiveness, you get denied. What can you do after that? Is there an appeal process? How do you handle that?
That's a great question. So the SBA has stated there will be an appeal process. And I'm getting very comfortable saying this. However, we are awaiting additional guidance on what that appeal process looks like. So the example you shared is something that's on a lot of our minds. We want to make sure that the information is as accurate as it can be when it's transmitted. But if there is some issue where, you want to appeal that, we're just waiting on what that looks like. So more to come on that.
Okay. Here's a question. Oh, yeah. We're asking if you could stop sharing your screen for a second. That'd be.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. Thanks for the technology assistance. Perfect.
This life in the virtual world. Couple other questions that I had. Again, maybe you went over it, but just in a real specific way. What's the time frame in which the loan forgiveness application and actual documentation must be submitted to the lender?
Yes, Mark, I can take that one. So, Mike, the borrowers may submit the forgiveness application any time before the maturity date of the loan. But it's important that you check with the bank and your lender that funded your PPP loan as to when they will begin accepting applications for forgiveness, as Mark just mentioned. So obviously as that timeline starts once that goes. So as of today, most banks have not started accepting forgiveness applications due to the pending guideline from the Treasury and the unknown still trying to be worked out in that process. So.
All righty. And then Dave, as long as you're answering, maybe you'd know this one. How long can you expect for loan forgiveness for the actual process to take place?
Sure. Sure. So per the SBA guidance, lenders have up to 60 days to decision their loan forgiveness application. Hopefully it won't take that long, but that's how long they have, and submit to the SBA for review. And then the SBA will then have 90 days from that point to review and remit the SBA approved loan forgiveness amount to the lender to be applied to the loan. So those are the maximums. We're obviously hoping that it will be more of a streamlined process than that, but 60 for the bank that you applied through, and then 90 for the SBA to review.
All right, so once somebody applies, they shouldn't be shocked if they feel like they've fallen into like a dead zone for a while and they haven't heard anything back.
Correct, just due to the volume, overall volumes and whatnot through that. So no, right, there should be some expectation that it could take a little bit longer within those time constraints, but yes.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? It looks like I've got one again from Nurse Laura. Nurse Laura, why don't you just ask it? You can unmute yourself and you can ask it. You're a frequent flyer here, so.
I am a frequent flyer and not afraid to talk. I feel really grateful. First, I just want to say thank you for doing this to the chamber, but also I'm grateful that I bank with MNT. I love MNT. bank with M&T, and I have a PPP loan with M&T. So my question is, again, I think I might have got more money than I maybe should have in my PPP. I don't know. I'm trying to understand how much is possibly forgivable. You mentioned that the 8 out of 52 weeks and my taxes from last year. So last year I was only operational for 6 months. I only opened my business in May of last year. So that number isn't really an accurate of, 8 out of 52 because I was only operational for 6 months. So how will you determine, or the SBA, how will they determine what is forgivable?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Laura. There are a couple nuances, and I think, I'm trying to remember which slide it was on that we reviewed, but there are some different periods based on when businesses were open, and there's also some additional information related to if there's a seasonal business. So you can, I believe, select which time period you're kind of monitoring your average that you're mentioning. I'm happy again to maybe give you a call offline to give you that details. That's pretty specific, and I'd love to point you to that specific area. But from a compensation standpoint, depending on whether you're using the 8-week choice, if you received your loan before June 5th, the employer compensation is capped at $15,385 if you're self-employed with no employees. If you're using the 24-week period, which you do have the option of doing, it's capped at $28,833 for payroll. So those are kind of the two cap periods on that.
Okay, thank you.
But Laura, Dave and I are happy to touch base with you offline on some of the more specific questions you may have. That's a really good question, and we do have some more details on what those provisions are.
Thank you.
And thank you both. And if you'd mute yourself again, Nurse Laura, that'd be great. Now, Richard Turner has his hand raised. This is a new one. He has a question, sir.
Yeah, so there's this two periods of evaluation, right? The 8-month or 24-month, and it seems like it's a choice. And I guess the question that I've got is around the FTE evaluation, because you have to sustain the level of staffing in that 24-month period. So when we're looking at the window to apply for forgiveness and trying to figure out what's the one best to our advantage, when is the period snapshot for the 24-month period? Is that all the way to December?
Yeah, you have up till December 31st to use it. However, there was a recent IFR that clarified that you can apply once you kind of met that requirement. So if you meet it within, say, 15 weeks, you can still apply for forgiveness then. So you don't have to wait to December 31st if you're utilizing the safe harbor option to increase your FTEs back to the levels they were before February 15th.
Right. So I guess the question I've got is, then do they come back in December and ask us to validate that we sustain through that period?
No, it would be the date through which you apply for the forgiveness.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure, Richard. Great question.
Do we have any other questions? I think what this is probably going to do is at least get a lot of people thinking. Maybe there's probably a lot of people out there with numbers and forms that are a lot smarter than I am with this. But I think what it's going to do also is get a lot of people thinking about what's the next step they have to take. And they either contact you if they've done the loan through you, or whichever bank they've actually done the actual loans through, and to get the process rolling. Because at the end of the day, the last thing that you want is to get turned down and say, this isn't forgiven, you've got to pay it back. The grant's a grant. We'd like to make sure everybody here in Carroll gets this handled as a grant. So,
and again, the best thing I can say is, if you haven't done so already, download the application forms from the treasury.gov site. Review it. There's instructions, there's notes, there's information on what documents you need. It highlights almost everything that we covered here on this webinar. Obviously a lot more in government language, but it's very helpful, and it's really important that you got to kind of get a handle on what information you really need to start to gather as you go through this journey. And obviously that your banker's there to help you through this, but the more you can prepare yourself in advance, the better it's going to be when you start to decide you're ready to apply for forgiveness with your banking institution.
Great. And I see that Richard just put a link up to the.
Thank you, Richard. That's it. Yeah.
He's the man. Okay. Any other questions? It's a lot of information for early in the morning. That's why I said everybody had their coffee to clear their brain so they could soak this information in. Don't forget, at the end of the day, if you're like, man, I really would like to see this again, it's going to be on the Chamber's website and CMC. Here's a question we just got. Let me take a look at this. BL Miles, my 8-week period ended June 21st. How long do I have to file for forgiveness?
Once the bank that you applied for your forgiveness is starting to accept applications, you can apply for forgiveness. Obviously, the deadline, if you're the deadline to apply, if you wait, is December 31st. You want to try to get it in before the end of the year. But if you're using the 8-week period and you have all your documents together and you reviewed and you're sure that it's right in that period of where you need to be, as soon as your bank is offering the forgiveness application, you should be good to go since it expired June 21st.
All right, great. Now, Richard, you had one more comment, I think.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, for getting this information out there and making all the folks and the resources available from M&T. It's great to be able to get these questions answered. And we know as the changes happen, we'll be back with more questions. You hear a lot of information or news out there about the PPP program. Of course, you hear the horror stories or the tough luck stories on some of folks being able to take advantage of it. But for those of us who did, we were really grateful because we were actually able to bring people off of unemployment, which I think is what the intent of the program was. And we were able to sustain our operations as a result and continue to provide the level of services that we otherwise would have had to dip down on with the way the impact was, because our funding was reliant upon people doing sponsorships. We were covering sports. Of course, there's no sports at the moment, so we had to basically shut down all of our sports programming and all of that sponsorship revenue that came along with it. So this was, for us, an effective way that we could redirect our efforts back into our community. So it was a great opportunity for us. Thank you.
Right. I don't think we have any more questions. We do have Sherry from CMC just saying great information to help navigate the PPP process. CMC will have a recording of this webinar on our website. And it's also going to be rebroadcast on cable channel 19 and their high def channel 1086. And my guess is that it'll probably be up on the website sometime today, at the latest tomorrow. It might be there already. I'm not sure. But these guys are very efficient. So any other questions? We're just about to the point of 9:30. We want to be respectful and not keep people longer than we said. Obviously, if you have any specific personal questions, call whichever bank you've dealt with. I want to give one quick announcement for the Chamber. We are offering a special, if you're not a member of ours right now, I seldom put out too many pleas for folks to join. Our message is always go to our website, carrollcountychamber.org, to find our actual members. But it should be no surprise that with the COVID-19 crunch, membership numbers they are a little bit down right now. People are really being careful with their cash and their money, and I can respect that. There's a lot of things you get for being a member of ours on our website, the traffic that we produce. We have energy co-ops, the type of networking. We have a lot of good things for you. And we have a special offer right now. If you pay for next year, you get the rest of this year for free. So you're getting really 18 months for the price of 12. So if you're interested, go to our website, carrollcountychamber.org, or you can call me up. Other than that, I want to say thank you again to our friends from M&T Bank, Mr. Mark Blacksten, Mr. Dave Hogue, and you guys are great. And I want to thank again our people, the whole team from CMC. You guys are amazing. And since there's no other questions, have a wonderful day. Be careful, stay safe. We're absolutely all going to get through this together, okay? So hang in there, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Okay.